I usually don't devote much of my content, especially here on YouTube, to church politics. Yes, I'd probably get a lot more viewership if I did that, but on principle, I think devoting most of your content to such toxic superficialities is, I think it's corrosive to theological and public discourse. So that's never going to happen on this channel. But every so often, I do think it's important to offer a perspective on a church controversy if I think that A, it's a unique perspective, and B, helpful to the public conversation. And I certainly think that's the case when it comes to how I approach the Vatican's recent crusade, for lack of a better word, against the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite, or more, colloquially termed the traditional Latin Mass. I don't like that term. I think it's a bit imprecise, but it's kind of what we have. Um, Now, first things first, right up front, I do, from an ecclesiological perspective, want to clarify that I'm not questioning the Pope's authority to restrict or to regulate the celebration of the extraordinary form. I did a whole stream on this question last week, so if you want to check that out, you can definitely look at that. And on that note, if you like what I do, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get a notification when I go live or upload a video. And if you really like what I do, support is always helpful. So if you want to support my work, you can become a patron, patreon.com/classicaltheist. You get unlimited Q&A access, book recommendations, catechetical notes, video requests. If you want me to cover a topic that's on your mind, you can just request it and I'll do it. Um, and Also monthly articles and some exclusive streams here and there too. So a whole nine yards. So if you like what I do, you want to support me, that's a great way to do it. Um, and You can see the information in the description. Once again, that's patreon.com/classicaltheist. So anyway, so yeah, while I'm not questioning the Pope's authority with respect to regulating the use of the extraordinary form, I am absolutely entitled, per Canon 212, to raise concerns about the prudence, and in this case, really the coherency of the direction that he's headed when it comes to the celebration of the Vitus Ordo. Um, Now, there is a theological and an ecclesiological reason that I strongly object to the restrictions, but also a pragmatic and a prudential reason that is no less important in my eyes. So let's start though with the theological and the ecclesiological. Following the thought of Pope Benedict XVI, and by the way, he's been lied about when it comes to Summorum Pontificum. He's totally been lied about. A lot of officials at the Vatican say things like, "Oh, he put out Summorum Pontificum to placate from a political perspective, like from a Machiavellian perspective, the traditionalists, so that they wouldn't veer into schism." Now, that is just not true. It may have partially entered into his reasoning process, but his primary reason, and he was explicit about this, his primary reason was for the sake of ecclesiological coherence. And he said this explicitly, as I said. So that lie just has to be done away with. So, following his thought on that ecclesiological coherence, I think it really does pertain, very much so, to the hermeneutic of continuity, to not merely develop doctrine in fidelity to the deposit of faith and prior magisterial teachings. Um, I think it also pertains to the hermeneutic of continuity, albeit in a less formal way, to the church's preservation of sacred rites. I mean, sacred rites, while they're not themselves, they are to be distinguished properly from the deposit of faith. Nevertheless, they are themselves monuments of the great tradition that we're trying to safeguard. Now, this isn't to say that the church needs to preserve the same exact ritual form of a given liturgy, frozen in time for the rest of her pilgrimage on earth. But it is to say that um, when a new reform of the liturgy enters into the life of the church has got to take great care to ensure that the timeless and perennial treasures of the sacred liturgy of a given family of rites, the church has got to make sure that those are kept intact and kept alive so that we don't run the risk of snuffing them out by being too carried away with the zeitgeist of a given age, such as, for example, the zeitgeist of the 70s. I think that's largely what animated the reform in question. Therefore, so that the church can, as Benedict XVI said, remain fundamentally one, united with her own past and one with her own identity, I think it's very important to keep alive this ancient form of the sacred Roman liturgy well into the future, so that the reforms of the present can truly be seen to stand the test of time, or maybe fall into irrelevance once the steam of that 70s zeitgeist wears out. I think we're already seeing that happen with certain elements of the Novus Ordo, at least as it's normatively celebrated. There is a reason why young people flock to the old rite, and it's because I think the old rite preserves those timeless and perennial liturgical elements. Um, and by contrast, the Novus Ordo, at least in its present form, makes some of those timeless and perennial liturgical elements either optional or just eliminates them altogether. So I think we are seeing at a time when the current reforms are being tested a bit. That's why it's important to have this control group, as it were, to keep us sensible. So that's my theological point. But there's also a very crucial pragmatic and prudential blunder to be found at the heart of Traditionis Custodes, and it has to do with which of the TLM communities are targeted for aggressive censure and which ones are left alone. Now, as it stands currently, um, it's the diocesan TLM communities that are targeted most severely with heavy restrictions, with the most heavy restrictions, or even annihilations. Whereas the Ecclesia Dei community, so I'm talking about the FSSP, Fraternity of St. Peter, Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest, those communities are left largely untouched. They're allowed to kind of do their own thing. But this is where the bulk of the incoherence is found, in my view. Like, why on earth, if you really are concerned with the Latin Mass being a hotbed of anti-Vatican II or anti-Novus Ordo sentiment, if that's your concern, why are you specifically targeting diocesan Latin masses in particular for termination? For one, diocesan parishes that celebrate the extraordinary form, they're almost always celebrated um, along with the ordinary form, side by side. And that means that, for one, all of those priests are by default not only um, not going to have a schismatic mentality when it comes to the legitimacy and the basic goodness of the Novus Ordo. That's kind of a given, you know? Um, Otherwise, they would be willfully participating in a mass um, that they themselves believe to be evil, which would make them complicit in sin. Um, so, so that covers the priests, but for two, so not only the priests, but also the parishioners themselves, who are involved in these diocesan Latin Mass communities, they would basically have to be involved in a parish community, kind of by definition, comprised of both TLM goers and Novus Ordo goers. And while in some cases this can be a source of tension, for the most part, this means that the TLM goers and the Novus Ordo goers in these communities are going to be praying together, engaging in the same kind of catechetical and evangelization ministries together, perhaps even go to the same mass, like on daily masses in particular. In fact, this happens in many parishes. I know this. Um, so, in this category of TLM goers, what you actually have are the highest concentration of TLM goers who are most likely to either be in full communion with Rome and her magisterial teachings, or at least they're going to be most open to correction on these points. And by contrast, the Ecclesia Dei communities, while I support them, they're most likely going to be susceptible to the very kind of insulation or liturgical bubble that contributes to these schismatic mentalities that Rome is ostensibly, at least, uh, concerned about. So, yeah, I mean, if restrictions are prudent at all, and I'm not convinced that they are, they would best be served, in my view, in regulating these Ecclesia Dei communities so that maybe they're given more exposure to the mainstream life of the church. For example, I wouldn't be opposed necessarily, and I know this would be controversial, but I wouldn't be exactly opposed to requiring these Ecclesia Dei communities to maybe host one Novus Ordo on at least maybe 1 day per month, or to have some targeted catechetical teaching on the legitimacy of Vatican II, something like that. Um, and I think that might go a long way in mending the problem. But the only effect that this current legislation is really having is making the communities that are most amenable to the uh, living magisterium, um, making them um, feel as if they're being singled out as disobedient when they're the ones who are most likely to be obedient. So on the one hand, I think it would make the Ecclesia Dei communities more insular, more like echo chambers, and it would make the diocesan parishes that celebrate the Latin Mass, I think it would make them, or some parishioners there, maybe begin to veer off into these insulated bubbles, maybe even schismatic bubbles. And while there are some who might say that, oh, well, if you're going to be driven to schism over a form of the Mass, then are you really in a good spiritual space to begin with? Well, clearly not, but in response to that, I would simply repeat the words of the Our Father, right? Lead us not into temptation. A good shepherd is going to ensure that his governance takes into account where his sheep are, strengths and weaknesses included, and they're going to be making decisions that don't provoke their weakest impulses. That's not only a matter of prudence, it's a matter of charity. And, this is actually what a pope truly inspired by the concept of authentic synodality would do. But instead, we get this synodality for me, but not for thee kind of dynamic going on. So, on the supposition that this is where his true intentions lie, where the Pope's intentions lie, these decisions are not just imprudent, but they're incoherent on the basis of that supposition. Right? If that was his supposition, that he's really motivated by synodality and a desire for ecclesial unity, he would not be going in this direction. And so I hope and pray that he changes course. I hope and pray that he can get new advisors. I hope and pray that he himself can bring into closer alignment his stated intentions and his actions. So that's where my thoughts are on the matter. I hope this was helpful. If you enjoyed this content, if you liked what I had to say, if you learned something, if you maybe heard a unique perspective that you appreciate, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get a notification when I go live or upload a video. And again, if you do want to support my work, you can send a super thanks. That's always helpful. But also Patreon, patreon.com/classicaltheist. God bless you.